Welcome to another episode of the All Turtles Podcast, a show about entrepreneurship and AI. I'm John Cifuentes, co-founder at All Turtles. On this episode, Phil Libben and I interview Renée DiResta, researcher of computational propaganda and disinformation. We talk to Renée about how recent news events feed the rage machines of Twitter and Facebook with misinformation, and how AI contributes to that, but could also be part of the solution. Then, Jessica joins Phil and I for our I Roll Please segment, in which we take commonly repeated startup advice and evaluate whether it's worth following. We also answer a listener question about self-driving cars. So joining us today, we have Renée DiResta, who researches computational propaganda and disinformation with Data for Democracy and New Knowledge.
Hey, Renée.
Hey, Phil.
Thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a busy couple of weeks for your line of work.
It has been, yeah. It's a busy weekend, too. I think the Covington Catholic story has evolved into a whole complicated morass, and so a lot of what I spent looking... When I woke up this morning, a news story had come out from CNN saying that one of the accounts that had been a leading figure in the distribution of the original video was perhaps not what it seemed.
There's something banned from Twitter, right? There was
taken down from Twitter.
Potentially fake account. But step back a little bit. So you research, how would you describe it?
I research the spread of malign information on the internet.
Okay. And intentionally malign information.
Yes,
separate
exactly.
from like the vast majority of the internet, which is maybe unintentionally malign.
Exactly. Things where people purposely want to push a narrative to set an agenda.
Right. And that's not a new thing.
No, not at all.
But you think there's something new and noteworthy about it these days?
I mean, why do I have a job is what you're asking. So I would say that there's always been, malign information on the internet, per your point. I think that what we've seen with the kind of consolidation of most internet users onto a handful of social platforms has really changed the game. Certain types of algorithms that amplify information or allow anyone to make anything go viral have also kind of changed the game. So it went from a world of decentralized kind of blogs and websites where, yes, there was always kind of some BS on those, but you had to really work hard to find it, to you open up your Twitter feed and, using the example of Covington Catholic, the entire internet is unified in this moment of rage. And then we come to find out a little bit later that perhaps things were not what we thought they were.
Covington Catholic, since we have no idea whether this podcast episode will actually appear in 2019 or in some far distant future, people may or may not remember, this was the incident where a group of, Catholic high school boys, right, wearing MAGA hats were videoed, apparently in a confrontation with a Native American protester, and there was some outrage on both sides. And it's, as of, 24, 48 hours after the event, it's not completely clear what's been going on and how much malicious misinformation there may have been.
Yeah, there was a lot. Well, it's an interesting case study because there's misinformation, right? So there's the idea that depending on what clip of the video you see, it can look very different, particularly depending on how your political biases align.
Right.
One of the things that emerged was that there was a Black Israelites group, which I remember the Black Israelites from when I was a college student in New York, where they would just kind of stand on street corners and scream at you.
And yell, yeah.
And so there was all of a sudden this moment where the internet rediscovered that the Black Israelites existed and that they, actually were kind of provocateurs and not the nicest people. And they also were involved in this confrontation, depending on which angle and clip and time of the video you see. And so there's the way in which these sort of like almost pseudo events, they happen in the real world, but then they're transformed into almost caricatures of what actually happened. And depending on which caricature you see, which particular network you belong to, you're going to see a different point of view on that. The mainstream media kind of came in, and depending again on which side of the mainstream media you were on, there was amplification of one version supporting the boys, one version not. And then we come to find out that the original kind of seed for the video, the original outrage kind of the core of it was this first video that was tweeted with a very particular short kind of view, was tweeted by an account that has since been taken down from Twitter for being a malign account, an inauthentic account. So that's where you get at the disinformation piece, which is, there's a lot of ways to be misinformed inadvertently, but when you come to find out that an account is using artificial means of dissemination to gin up outrage, that's where it becomes more of a deliberate.
The type of of misinformation or false information, I guess, is changing, where it isn't so much that a lot of these things are just false or just made up. Like there's usually a kernel of something that actually happened, some actual people that actually feel a certain way. It's just that everything is made to seem worse than it really is, right? All of the conflicts are amplified.
Yep, exactly.
Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think we live in, particularly speaking as an American, we live in a polarized country. And as a result of that, there's particularly in the political sphere, there's these, a lot of distrust on both sides. I think what we saw with Russia and what we see with disinformation campaigns more generally is you can exploit that very effectively, and you can continue to facilitate the polarization, continue to facilitate tribalism by leaning into it. So by saying, by kind of building affinities and making people feel a certain way about their tribe and then positioning it in direct conflict to other tribes. The Covington Catholic thing was sort of this, you had a Native American elder, you had a boy wearing a MAGA hat. This is almost like caricatures of, personas that are, held in great regard and by one side, reviled by one side. And so there was a lot of opportunity to kind of capitalize on the fact that this was like a made for the outrage machine kind of moment.
But this account that spread the initial initially catalyzed the outrage, which has since been taken down. Like, I know it's early, we're not actually sure, I guess, who this person is, but like, what do you think is the motivation? Who is this account, and what are they aiming after? Sometimes
it's just domestic ideologues. A lot of the conversation focuses on Russia because that's where it gets into notions of kind of hostile foreign actor interfering in the course of American politics and society. But there's a lot that happens among ideologues who want to push a particular agenda also. So we see the culture wars, the being fought through things like manipulative dissemination. We see them being fought through things like gamification of spreading particular points of view on Twitter or movie reviews or just kind of mass coordinated action to push a particular us versus them kind of narrative. That's really what it winds up coming down to a lot of the time. It's us versus them. Sometimes it's related to specific policies or something that has more nuance, but that's much less rare because the outrage machine is what makes people step in to click that share button, click that like button, to continue to spread it themselves.
In this particular example, what's your process for even forming an opinion? Or do you care to have one, or you're more interested in kind of parsing the misinformation?
No, actually, when it was just the story of the boys in the video, I personally didn't really get involved. I watched the video, I watched the other video. I have a Twitter stream that's pretty well curated. I have, people on the right, people on the left, and I saw the various points of view. But just the regular culture war battles, I don't find that interesting on a personal level. I find them exhausting, and I think that that's probably pretty common. But then when CNN broke the story that the account was, that there was this sort of initial seed of something that looked inauthentic, that was when I actually started to find it more interesting. And I just started kind of looking into what could we learn about this account? What could we learn about the dissemination pattern? Unfortunately, a lot of the time, once the press writes about it, Twitter pulls it down instantly, and then that kind of like nukes most of the you can see the tweets in Wayback Machine depending on if the account's been archived. This particular account's had some viral successes before, but we can't see anything about the followers. We can't. There's a lot that's just kind of already missing. One of the big challenges with this is that there are so many opportunities to rile people up on the internet. That the challenge is really a lot of the time it just becomes forensic work after the fact, as opposed to using something like AI to kind of intercede more in the moment and look at these things more in real time than doing what I did, which was just kind of digging around a day and a half later.
So getting to that point of some of the stakeholders, maybe the companies involved, maybe regulators, maybe having access to more advanced tools to actually figure out what's going on and prevent them. What is the state of that in the world right now?
It's really not that great. I think one of the questions is, when I think about AI and what AI is, the improvements in AI are going to do to disinformation, I see it very much as like it's going to make the offense quite a lot more sophisticated, very much harder to detect, very much harder to combat. And so I see the defense is always kind of a catch-up game. But where we are today, I don't know if CNN kind of received a tip-off or just kind of right-clicked on the profile picture and looked and realized that it was a stock photo and that was how it happened. I don't actually know the sort of initial thing that made them start looking, but that's there's some interesting opportunities to say, like, when something starts to go viral, maybe it does flag, maybe something or someone goes and looks at it. Going and identifying that a photo is a stock photo is not that hard to do.
Right.
Question becomes like
theoretically, you could probably just like drag it into Google image search and it would have seen all of the identical photos to it. Like they already do that kind of stuff pretty well.
Right. So I think it's the challenge of what are the triggers that make someone go and do that work.
Right.
And since real things go viral all the time, you don't want to. You're dealing with a situation where this is not. Most things that are going viral are probably still real. So the question becomes, how do you find these needles in the haystack that do kind of blow up and have this extraordinary impact? And I don't think we have a very good answer for that. That's one of the things that we try to think about at New Knowledge. But the challenge is always you can't really do it based on keywords. The keyword detection is it's only going to work in certain cases. You can look at particular distribution patterns, but they're going to change their distribution patterns rather quickly if it's identified as kind of a malign signature. Same thing with, with the early Russia stuff, they went out and created blogs. And so there were these domains that you could key off of to try to track their stuff around the internet. But now more sophisticated actors are just using highly polarized existing content written by real Americans. So, why create a blog for, a more extreme version of Black Lives Matter when you can just go find more extreme activists on any side of a particular issue? And that's where we get at the notion that this is sort of kind of an arms race. And we are working on building detection technology. At the same time, anytime new technology comes out, it can be co-opted in a certain way, and that's, in malign ways, and that's what we are already starting to see.
You wrote a research report for the Senate Intelligence Committee that became kind of somewhat notorious over the past couple of months when it came out. About it's dissecting the actual Russian manipulation of the 2016 election. What was that process like? Like, you were working with data provided by Facebook and Google and other companies. You're working with the staffers of the Senate committee.
Yeah, I had gotten to know folks on that committee a little bit ahead of the tech hearings because I had done some of the work trying to explain pathways of dissemination of misinformation. So sort of a 101 kind of this is how it happens. This is how we see it playing out. As the hearings were called, we said, look, it'd be really great if there was a way to do some investigative work on what the platforms have seen, because no one has done a cross-platform study at this point. And that's because, Facebook and Twitter may communicate about some things, but they're not providing necessarily this entire corpus of material to each other. So the Senate decided to have a few different groups of independent experts. We were not to talk to each other. We didn't know who the others were. And we were asked to look at this material, which is about 400 gigs or so. And
this is just log files provided by...
It was, they provided really different things. So it was Twitter, Facebook, and Alphabet provided YouTube and AdWords data.
To the Senate?
To the Senate.
And the Senate gave it to you for the research?
The Senate gave it to us, yep. That was, YouTube didn't provide engagement data.
Right.
Twitter provided a ton of stuff, but they provided it kind of late after, Senator Warner had kind of yelled at them for not providing very much. Then they provided an abundance of stuff, so their material actually wound up being kind of the best. Facebook and Instagram provided material in the form of the memes and the memes and engagement data. So I could see the text of the post, the image of the meme, and then the comments, shares, likes, and reactions numbers. I could not actually see the comments, which was kind of an interesting... that was actually what I felt was really missing, because we did research into kind of quantifying the operation. So I can say there were 167 million engagements on Facebook, or sorry, maybe on Instagram. And we could look at things, we could identify the audiences that were targeted, We could identify the narratives that they used across their pages, between their pages, ways in which if you followed one of their pages, they would refer you to other pages. So ways in which they built their audiences and built these kind of mirages of media properties that just like, kind of encompassed
all
the
the ways
person
in
who
which
would follow
the platforms
them.
are very intentionally
Exactly,
designed.
very intentionally designed. Yeah. So this is just a social media marketing operation.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the weird stuff, which is where they start reaching out to activists directly, infiltrating protest movements. You don't see most social media agencies. They'll identify influencers, but they won't quite go that far.
Like Facebook ad reps would reach out to.
They would do a lot of things like they would communicate with people over Facebook Messenger. Hey, you're holding a protest about the, this officer-involved shooting. Let us buy you some posters.
Oh, wow.
They would create events so people would go and protest. The Russians would do this, yeah. They would create events so people would go protest in the streets. They would create events where two opposing sides of an issue would go protest at the same place at the same time. So you saw this with Texas secessionists and a Muslim culture organization protesting at the same time, same space in Houston. They reached out to, they put up posts suggesting that LGBT youth who were struggling and wanted to reach out to them via DM. So that's where you get at the sort of much more of like a human-style intelligence operation. So this is, takes the social media operation, but then you also have the in-the-streets kind of provocateur Cold War-style KGB operations to amplify tensions and unrest very much in the real world. So there's this fascinating kind of hybrid operation. What we couldn't get at with the data sets we had was the idea of impact, which is the question that everybody wants to know. Did this swing the election? Did this, change hearts and minds? I think it's kind of impossible to make that call without things like audience, what is the demographic makeup of the audiences and where do they live? We know that they ran ad targeting to kind of pull in an initial audience. How did that grow? What did that grow into? We know that they were doing that there were thousands of comments on some of these posts. We don't know what the comments said. So for the posts advocating that Black people stay home and not vote, for example, like what was the community's response to that? What did the people were they like, yeah, right on? Or were they like, no, this is stupid, I'm going to go vote? There were a couple of mistakes where they actually posted screenshots of Russian language Twitter. So it says, chitat instead of follow and stuff. And they post that to Facebook. And I think the post was a tweet complaining about voter fraud, but it was the Russian Twitter interface. And they posted it to this Southern targeted page. And I'm like, I'm dying to see the comments here. Did anybody say like, why is your Twitter interface in Russian?
Right.
But these were it was a really interesting project. I think there's still more to be done. I think that there's just a wealth of material. I think the only people who really understand what happened still, as far as like the platform role, are the platforms.
Right.
So all of the stuff that the Russians did for the 2016 election, and I know that they're part of one of your larger themes is that like what they're doing now is different. Like we shouldn't keep fighting the old battles, but all the stuff they did in 2016, which was in your report, had that exact same thing just been done by, Americans in the U.S. just trying to, influence the campaign, like would it have been illegal? Is the fact that's illegal the fact that it's Russians, and really what they're doing is they're using the platforms in the way that they were meant, and they were maybe slimy, but that's sort of what everyone's going to do next time, not just from Russia.
Well, I think that's the conversation that we started to have in 2018, right? Which is as the evidence emerges, even before the big report that I put out in December, as the kind of slow trickle of investigative things done by my colleagues, by researchers in academia, as we started to see these things, I think there was a sense that most of the content wouldn't have come down for any kind of terms of service violation. It wasn't offensive. Right. It was offensive in the haha kind of snarky way. A lot of the time, it wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't overt calls to violence. It wasn't egregious. They did get moderated at some point because one of their pages, Secured Borders, started to complain aggressively about those fascists at Facebook taking down their content. Mm-hmm. And that was towards the end of the data set. And so it wasn't clear if the fascists at Facebook were taking down their content because they had at this point realized that this was a foreign influence operation, or if they had just crossed the line or been reported or some such. But I think that one of the challenges is the notion of authenticity. And that's what a lot of the kind of evolution in platform thinking over the last year has been the idea that inauthentic coordination is actually the problem, inauthentic dissemination patterns. These are things where, independent of narrative, you can detect that this is happening.
Right.
And you can do things like build technology to observe these signatures.
And this could be everything from, review manipulations on Amazon just for the good old-fashioned purpose of just selling more of a crappy product to any of the stuff that was actually going on.
Yeah. The challenge is that the kind of bad actors are really good at the human element of this. And I did some work on review manipulation on Amazon starting in April of last year. It's kind of I tabled the project when I switched to doing the Russia stuff, but need to pick it back up because what I saw there was I joined a couple of Facebook groups and people began to offer me products. And they were mostly from China. The Facebook profiles were fake. And they would give me very sophisticated instructions for how to game Amazon's review, their kind of automated detection services, so detection algorithms. So I would be told, search for the product. They wouldn't give you a link to click through. Search for the product. Add it to your wish list. Keep it there for 2 days. Let's say it's Bluetooth headphones. Add 3 other types of Bluetooth headphones to your wish list also. Make sure you're clicking through, and then come back, click buy mine. Send me the order number and I'll PayPal you for I'll PayPal you for the product and your time.
And they're doing this so that you would look like a legitimate purchaser, so then you could leave some kind of fake review.
Yes.
Yeah. So this authenticity concept seems to be really the critical one.
I think so. Yeah.
It's emerging. So what do we do? Like, it's felt to me over the past few months that maybe there's this fundamental inconsistency between democracy, kind of in a large sense, and the way the internet has evolved, where kind of, in order to have a functioning democracy, you sort of have to convince people to change their minds. Like, you have to move people to some sort of common ground. Like, you can't just have one group of people just imposing their will on everyone else. It's not really democracy. And the way that the kind of ad-targeted internet business models have evolved, you don't really need to convince anyone of anything or change their mind. You really need to just isolate and measure and identify as well as precisely as possible where you are, so that you can get marketed to exactly kind of where you are. And it's that incompatibility between trying to change people's minds to kind of get them into some sort of a governable consensus, and really just trying to measure and isolate people and keep them as separate as possible so that you can effectively market to them, not necessarily so you can break their government. It feels like could just be a very long-standing problem.
I think it is going to be a very long-standing problem. I think that, per your point, these platforms, for the most part, besides the authenticity issue, they were being used as they were designed to be used. Right. You can think of propaganda as a marketing campaign for an idea. Yeah. It's not illegal. It is, the foreign propaganda has to be registered. There are laws already to address that, and that's where detection of that is a significant challenge, but one where there's already a legal framework in place that makes that something advantageous, something really kind of worth doing, so that at least you can take some action. I think the challenge right now, though, is we've kind of hit a point where clicktivism is that's how political campaigns get run.
Yeah.
I mean, and so there's really fine lines there between what is clicktivism and legitimate clicktivism versus what is manipulation. When we talk about coordinated activity, how coordinated are we talking? And when we talk about things like manufactured consensus, where people will call on their friends to go brigade an article or go brigade a review, is that activism? Is that manipulative? These are the sorts of things where there's these it's very hard to kind of come down one way or another on it. And I think that's been one of the key challenges for the platforms. That's where I am sympathetic to the need to have better definitions for some of this stuff. Because right now, I mean, I remember the midterms, Ted Cruz had an app, Cruise Crew, and they would encourage people, and they also used this paid ad card type, Twitter card, where you could click the Twitter card and you would tweet the same thing that Ted Cruz's campaign had just tweeted. So you click the button and it automatically fills in the tweet with don't vote for Beto, vote for Ted, right? But the thing is, it doesn't link back to the original ad. It doesn't indicate that it's a paid sponsored message. So you would just have thousands and thousands and thousands of people, some of whom were sitting there clicking this button, real honest to God, diehard Ted Cruz supporters just out there clicking this button. But then we would see things like at 2:00 in the morning, Texas time, there would be thousands of other accounts that would simultaneously push the same verbatim tweet. And you actually can't, as a casual observer on the platform, you can't tell what that is. That's where you start to see like the ability to hide kind of bad actors and bots in what looks like a digital crowd. And that, I think, is one of the key challenges is that legitimate activism? What does the platform do? And the interesting thing here is that this is Twitter's own feature. This isn't,
Right. The spread of misinformation is great business for Twitter.
Well, it's business, right? It's not clear that Twitter itself is a great business. Like this has been part of my point is I'm not actually sure that any of these companies that are making, money on this are actually particularly great businesses. I mean, Facebook, I guess maybe as Twitter isn't all that strong as a company, and it may just be doing more damage than it's worth. Like these are not robust, business models. Are any shortcuts that you think the platforms can take to maybe mitigate some of this?
I don't think that there is a shortcut here, really. I think the thing that I've been advocating for the most is just multi-stakeholderism, which is, so dissatisfying because everybody wants the one quick fix. And I think that this is where it's law enforcement, like the FBI has, that was the kind of the coolest thing about the Russia investigation was seeing how what I could see in the data set reflected what the Eastern District and the Mueller indictments were saying. And so that was a fascinating, they had different information. They had the DMs, so you could see the Russian conversations with the American activists. They had the financial data. We had this social media kind of corpus. Third-party researchers who had been digging around had a ton of other stuff that they had found and gathered over time on other platforms. So they were on Medium, Tumblr, SoundCloud, you name it, they were there. And so there's this big company data set, there's the stuff found by researchers, and then there's the stuff that the FBI knows. It's only when you kind of put these pieces together that you really have a sense of what's happening. And that's for a forensic investigation. That's backward looking. But when you think about seeing things going forward, there are, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community has information that the platforms don't have. And even, Alex Stamos and others have said that there does need to be better information sharing. This is a total turnaround from the immediate kind of post-Edward Snowden era when the idea of cooperation was, absolutely nobody wanted to be seen as if they were kind of working with U.S. government in any way. But I think we've started to realize that as hostile foreign governments have recognized that they can use these tools, there is a place for that kind of collaboration and information sharing.
But yeah, what's tactically, what can we do besides be extreme cynics when anything polarizing and viral happens at the same time? It's should we personally be reflecting and looking on who's the motivator? Or
I think there's that. Yeah, I think Covington Catholic will actually go down as an interesting case study if it's written up well. But there's an opportunity for, at the government level, rethinking kind of the cyber doctrine and information operations. We haven't prioritized that. That hasn't been a major part of how the U.S. government thinks about cyber warfare, right? And that needs to change. Regular consumers, just regular people, when you see the outrage machine, when you see these tweets, actually doing that right click and look at the Google image search, that's sort of it's hard. You can't tell people to do that necessarily because you don't want them to live in a constant state of suspicion. That's not where we want to go either. But there's calls for creating more of a media literacy to help people understand what is a legitimate source, what is possibly likely to kind of push your buttons. There was a study that came out saying that actually older people are much more prone to share this stuff than younger people. So I think we do need to target the media literacy efforts, not necessarily at the college kids, but I think that between multi-stakeholderism, rethinking how we treat this, how the government even prioritizes this problem, and then thinking about educating the population, that's really the three things we can start with.
And maybe there is a role here for just the personal taste, personal preference for just how much outrage, as a consumer, you want to subject yourself to. I almost feel like, a few years ago it was all the rage to talk about getting enough hydration. You need 8 glasses of water a day or something, which I think was always a nonsense stat. And it kind of feels like we've become that way for outrage. Like we're kind of looking for our recommended daily servings of being outraged to the other team. And that didn't used to be the case. Like I'm trying to think back like 5 years ago, like how often would I actually be outraged at something that somebody who I disagree with politically did? And it wasn't, like a year would go by without me feeling any outrage. Whereas now it's definitely like a few times a day. So maybe there's something about like we should just get over the outrage.
And that's an interesting thing for AI also, right? Which is better NLP, better ways to think about what is your feed serving you? That's something that the platforms can control. Now, you say that and people start to scream about censorship and this and that, but I think that that's actually wrong because your feed is curated already. So if they change the weighting of the curation, that's, you just have to battle to find your way into the feed again. That's the era of social media. So I do think that there's things that you can do where Facebook thinks about its newsfeed, Twitter thinks about the, what is it showing you? Why is this tweet viral?
Yeah.
Facebook has the React-G, it can probably tell a little bit better than Twitter if something is highly polarizing and heated or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe actually try to build these things to optimize for a mental state other than outrage, which I think is the easy one to optimize for. It's the easy heightened emotional state where if you're a platform and you want people in a heightened emotional state so they're more likely to click on things, like outrage is probably the fastest one to auto-generate.
Yep.
But maybe that's the one that we should just start getting tired of. Like I'm personally tired of it. Like my reaction to the Covington video when I saw it too, I just saw it without any context originally and it looked pretty bad to me, but I was just as much kind of tired of like, I don't feel like getting outraged at more people wearing MAGA hats. Like I just don't care as much anymore. Maybe something in that is actually the silver lining.
Optimize for apathy.
You heard it here first.
Renee, thanks so much for joining us. It's really fascinating work.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Renee.
Now it's time for our Eye Roll Please segment, in which we discuss the bad advice that makes its way around Silicon Valley and offer our take. So this one, we're going to talk about waiting for the right moment to start your company, to raise money, to launch your product.
What does that even mean? Phil, you used to be a VC. What do VCs mean when they say this?
I think there's an important kind of kernel of truth here. It's just maybe framed incorrectly. So the timing is very important. Like in fact, the core thing of our selection criteria at All Turtles will work on, right, is the timing. Like, is this the right time to work on this project? You want to do something when it's the perfect moment. And by that, we have a pretty rigorous definition. We mean it's something that you could make right now. You could make this year in a mainstream way that you couldn't have made before. So right when an important problem goes from being impossible to solve to just being difficult, is kind of the right time to work on it. Because if somebody could have solved this problem 3 years ago, but they didn't, then that's a big question as to why not. Probably you just don't understand the problem. Whereas if you start working on something a couple of years before it can actually be made mainstream, then that's a very different kind of company. That's a longer time scale. Like, for example, I'm a big fan, hypothetically, of what's going to happen with augmented reality, but we're not doing any augmented reality projects because I think it's too soon. It's just, you can't make a mainstream augmented reality product right now, I don't think, because the hardware is not there. But as soon as it is, if in a couple of years from now we have really good consumer level kind of hardware for augmented reality, then yeah, there's probably all sorts of interesting augmented reality things.
Kind of depending what you want to be, those platform or hardware companies that, need years to develop products versus.
Yeah, like I think the year we made Evernote was the first year you could have made Evernote. Like I don't think if we'd started working on Evernote, we released the first modern version of 2008, and that was kind of the first year where you had iPhone and apps on the iPhone and that whole ecosystem. You couldn't have made it 2 years earlier because there just wasn't enough smartphone penetration. There was no app store. The year that Uber made Uber was pretty much the first year that you could have made Uber, because before that you just didn't have enough people with GPS on their phones. It wouldn't have worked. So I think like selecting what is different now that makes something possible is super important. I just don't know that the advice should be to wait. The advice should be to pick the thing that you're working on to be a thing that is of the moment right now. So if you want to work on something, it's always that's always a good time for something. It just may not be your idea. So I would use that more as a selection criteria for your idea, not so much as a timing criteria for when you're going to start a company.
That's good advice. So don't wait. Just be intentional about what you're doing and understand why it's only possible now. Now it's time for a listener question, and this one's from Jacob, who emailed his question. And again, that's hello@all-turtles.com. So Jacob says he is excited about autonomous cars because he hates driving. But in a previous episode, a discussion arose about the fact that not only is it possible that bad actors may interfere with the security of self-driving cars when they're on the road, but that it will happen. So this listener asks, what can we do? Cryptography is not bulletproof and also has some system performance impacts. So what's missing in the tech ecosystem to prevent tragedies related to the hacking of self-driving cars? So what does a hacked self-driving car even look like? What could happen?
I think this is, I think people envision, hackers reprogramming self-driving cars to go on, killing sprees or something, which, it's like a thing that's probably going to happen. I think this is a weighted risk type of thing. I think there is virtually no universe in which self-driving cars are more dangerous to human safety than humans driving them. And many of the attacks envisioned are going to be different between targeting or sabotaging one particular car versus getting, a million cars of the same type all to kind of flip out and go on a rampage. So I think the countermeasures that are deployed and that ought to be deployed are the ones that prevent kind of a mass attack like that, which there's ways of dealing with it. There's ways of like penetrating any particular car being something that's so expensive that, if you're a foreign intelligence service and you're willing to spend, millions of dollars, you might be able to kind of get into a particular one, but that won't give you access to, a whole class of cars. So I think the scenario of, all of a sudden every Ford, going in a murderous, rampage is not what's going to happen. I think, hackers screwing around with particular vehicles is what's going to happen. But honestly, I think that's still a much safer world than where tired, drunk, and like angry humans, drive these things.
If you have a question you'd like us to answer, you can send us an email at hello@all-turtles.com or tweet us using #AskAT. This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Worldwide Media Empire. We recorded this episode in the world-class Donatella Studios in San Francisco, California. Thanks to Renée DiResta for joining us for this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, send us an email to hello@all-turtles.com. Marie reads every message. Thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, including Jim Metzendorf for editing, Marie McCoy-Thompson for production supervision and editorial management, Chris Plug for his audio expertise, Micah Rivera for our artwork, and Matt Ammerman for our theme music. On behalf of Jessica Collier, Phil Libin, and yours truly, John Cifuentes, and the rest of the All Turtles team, thanks for listening.